and welcome to episode 26 of the Detours in Music podcast. I'm Laura Ruppel, and today we have an interview with Dr. Jaclyn Wappel, instructor of Harp at James Madison University. I hope you enjoy.
My name is Jaclyn Wappel, and I am the instructor of Harp at James Madison University, also at Washington and Lee University and Southern Virginia University, my three adjunct positions. Yeah, I keep up a whole studio here in Williamsburg, Virginia, and in Harrisonburg, as well as Richmond. So I'm a busy bee, that's for sure.
Can you talk about your start in music?
Sure. So I came from I would consider it an untraditional background, actually. When it comes to kind of the harp world, a traditional background is kind of like where, they're around 4-6 years old, they'll start up with the tiny little lever harps, learning their notes with their baby little instruments. And around 12-13, you start moving to the bigger instruments, ideally a full-size pedal harp. So the pedal harp is something you see whenever you're in the large ensembles. It's that, 6 foot tall. It has all the pedals, so you can play in all the keys. And it's about tens of thousands more dollars. Mm-hmm. And usually they'll join their orchestra or their youth programs and playing in school. And then they go on to auditioning for college. That's kind of like the general approach. For me, not quite the same, actually. I did start with some piano, and I studied with my mother. And I love my mother to death, but oh my goodness, I could not study piano with my mom. We were driving, we lived in Texas at the time, and there was a teacher who had literally a big sign that said harps right off the side of the highway. And we went in, I saw the harps in there, went to a concert, and I was hooked. It was just one of those things like, that's what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so I started at 13 years old, and I started on those little lever harps in a group class with about 5 or 6 adult harp players. So these are older women and men, in their 50s, 60s. And my teacher was Jeffrey Ricketts, and he was actually a Renaissance festival harpist. So I came from a background of actually really listening, a lot of improvisation, and even down to, reading chord symbols. So reading notes, and of course, being in a large ensemble did not quite happen for me actually until freshman year of college. Mm-hmm. So we did upgrade to a little bit of a bigger lever harp, so 38 strings, but my family couldn't afford the pedal harp. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that traditional background of years of pedal harp practice and ensembles, I had not got there yet. So freshman year, whenever I went to school at University of Texas is where I went. And I remember to this very day, that kind of deer in the headlights type of look. It was quite terrifying, but the learning curve was huge. But my teacher saw something. I owe her to this day. She saw something in my work ethic and how I was able to learn. And I had to learn how to play pedals in one semester. And even beyond that, I don't know if you remember playing La Fiesta Mexicana. That work. I did not know what a conductor was doing. I don't know what any of this was. And I had played that by ear. In college, just play it by ear completely. So my teacher was very patient with me. And eventually I caught up, and goodness gracious, we went from, the beginner music, learning the notes, freshman year, all the way jumping up to advanced music. So as you know, a lot of challenges, anxiety, or, hand things like, oh my gosh, this is too much, just a lot of stress. And you bet. So that was, in that case, that led me to where I was like, well, what am I going to do with this? Mm-hmm. And I know you had some comments on that, with the schools you attended and why. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those things, University of Texas we lived in Dallas-Fort Worth, and it's an amazing school. Mm-hmm. So many opportunities, great professors, huge band program. So you already know that it was like a big deal when I got thrown into those bands. Gosh, so terrifying. The minute you see those eyebrows look over at you, what's the harp doing over there? So I definitely stepped it up with a lot of determination, a lot of fear. And there was a point where I was like, is this worth it? Because it was so challenging coming from nothing, just levers, improvising, learning how to play chords and things. I was like, should I have been a jazz harpist instead? So it was a real worry that I had made the wrong decision until Elizabeth Richter, the professor of harp at Ball State University, she came my senior year. And she's like the angel from above. She's just, oh my goodness, I would do anything for her because of what she did for me. She had a lesson with me, and we kind of talked about what my goals were and what she saw in me. And just like my previous professor, she saw something, something that I was willing to work hard, past the adversity. And I auditioned for Ball State for my master's in music. And, I really picked up the pace for sure to be able to have master's level of music, and boom, I got accepted for the assistantship there. And I'm telling you now, I wouldn't be talking to you right now without that master's and that doctorate, not because of the degrees, but because Miss Richter was the most inspiring person in my entire life. It was just, we could have a whole conversation just about what she did as a person and as a mentor.
Do you think that harp is an instrument that typically people have to start when they're young, or more like affluent families have children that play harp maybe?
That's a very good point. And that happens a lot, especially when I'm teaching privately here, because, it can be kind of expensive. And at the time when I was starting, a lever harp, you can rent one for a small lever harp, but you could never rent pedal harps. And now you can do that, because when we talk about, Detours and later on, I worked also in retail. So I saw that other side of the harp world. And it's a stigma. It's a real thing, because even down to when I was living in Hong Kong, it was very, very prestigious, just because it was so expensive, one, to buy one, two, to maintain it, and then lessons with teachers are quite expensive too. But times are changing. So I used to think that, and it kind of was that way when I was younger, because we just couldn't afford that kind of, they're like $32,000 for a really nice pedal harp. That's a car, right? You want a car, or do you want a harp whenever you turn 16, if you can get either? So I agree, it was like that, but I think times are changing. I truly think they are.
When was that switch for you where you knew that you wanted to major in music?
For my undergraduate or for my master's?
For undergrad.
For undergrad. So I went into it because I have a lot of interests. I'm like 5'8", and I was into gymnastics, and I did all the painting and the art. I loved what I did, and I loved history. So to this day, maybe we'll talk in 10 years, and I can maybe have an answer for you. But to this day, I'm not sure why I didn't do archaeology over the harp, actually, because we looked into both whenever I was in my undergraduate. We tried to see what path was for me, and I don't know whether it was just my teacher was very charismatic and, saw something, or the archaeology program was probably just not my cup of tea. To this day, I don't even know, but I was going to go in for archaeology. And I think a lot of it came down to is someone saw something in me that I didn't quite see in myself. And she said, well, with this and this, we can do this. And she had like a plan, a plan for me that I never really had for myself. Like I said, my background was very kind of like, oh, let's play these pieces and improvise here. All of a sudden, there was this regimented thing set up for me. And I think I liked that. So I think that might have what finally pulled me in, maybe.
Yeah. And then if going in to pursue your master's, was that also a big decision for you?
Oh, yes. I have my top fives in my life. And I think of a top five best decisions I've ever made was to stick with going to my master's. And because at the time, as a senior right now, you're burnt out, you're exhausted. You've been working so hard, so many hours. I remember falling asleep in the practice room at 1 a.m., waking up at 3 and heading back to my dorm, and waking up at 7 and coming back. You really worked really hard, and I didn't know if I was good enough for it yet. I didn't quite feel that. I had a very strict teacher who I know she had a goal for me, but I also was trying to figure out who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. And I didn't have that direction in my undergraduate. And I also was always so insecure. I'm always playing catch up. But when Ms. Richter came around and started talking to me about almost like that different plan, like, no, this is, okay to feel this way. A lot of students feel this way. The big term that you've heard now is called imposter syndrome, which is oh my goodness, that is a scary thing for all levels of your studying. And I have felt that pretty bad. I remember many conversations with my family over like, I don't think I'm good enough for a master's, or, it'll feel like it's like a fluke that I got there. I don't really deserve this or something. So I was always thinking back to my freshman year. I never got over of, I'm always playing catch up. Instructor flipped that around for me.
Do you think the thing that you struggled with most in your undergraduate was just feeling behind the curve?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Because, when you're at a school, I mean, University of Texas especially, I mean, they have very high standards, as they should. And it's so hard sometimes feeling you're not quite at there, but you can. You can. And I remember little things like I got thrown pretty quickly into the University of Texas Wind Ensemble, which is with graduate students. So as a sophomore who had just learned how to follow a conductor a year ago, I'm in there trying to keep up, making sure I don't get that scary look from the conductor, and really trying to just bring up the skills as quickly as I can. And I'm telling you, fear will do that. And good thing I was stubborn. Yeah, it was quite a scary thing, but I still kept at it.
Yeah. So. Was there ever a point when you were thinking, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm going to do archaeology?
Oh, yes. When I talk about those, because we had our music building open, 24 hours. It was amazing. And I remember we had a harp floor, and the three of us, we had 3 harp majors, which is quite a lot actually for a school. And we were a team, and I remember sitting there, 1 a.m. I had to get like Monster energy drinks just to keep my energy levels up to get my practice, because I had a lesson the next day, and thinking, is this all worth it? I'm exhausted. My body is tired. We get like rips in our hands and blisters. Your back starts hurting. And I remember thinking like, I don't know if this is what I wanted to do. But then it's like, then you have a good performance and all that hard work suddenly comes to fruition, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm okay. And then you go back down again, and then you have a good performance, and then you go back down again. And it's like this constant up and down. And by senior year, you're just exhausted, because the music's always going to get more challenging. I think that's what it was, is I was dreaming of a time where I could go to a job or do a task and it be done. Write the paper, you submit it, it's done. But in music, as you know, it never ends. Even now during coronavirus, I'm like, oh my gosh, I should be practicing more for my recital. My recital's gonna be in March. So even then we still have that kind of thing. And I think you just get a little bit tired and worn out by it.
What's some advice you have for younger musicians who are just struggling a little bit? Maybe you see them at your universities and you're like, okay, I see the potential in them, but maybe they don't see it in themselves.
I would say my advice is, because I know that I think recognizing it's okay is the first step. That's the definitely approach I take with my students, because you bet sometimes there's going to be tears, and it's okay, because you're doing a huge thing. It's not normal. To be practicing 4 to 5 hours a day, and you're also getting 3 hours of sleep, and you're doing all your academic classes. This is not a normal life. And you're bound to get a pushback just because your psyche, clearly it's not normal for the psyche, and it's not forever. So that's the biggest thing. It's never forever. And some of the phrases that helped me, especially when I was powering through that dissertation, which is a whole new animal when it comes to your psyche, is that really the only way out, per se, is through. It's always through. And in the end, you always know more than you think you know, which no one believes when I say that, but it's true. Just you'll be amazed, especially when you get out beyond the college bubble, because for example, when I started to understand in retail what the adult amateurs were like in harp, I was just a rare animal. Whenever you're around everybody who's very talented and strong, it's easy to forget of what it's like out there, especially in the amateur, adult, and beginner world. We just don't see that. We think everybody is at that level and everybody's judging us. So some of the phrases I'll use to kind of motivate the students, I'll write them in their music. In 10 years, whenever they're teaching their students, they're going to see, I'll write down, never surrender, take no prisoners. It's never over, and it's okay to feel frustrated. And, when we talk about Detour, for example, because that's kind of intertwined in that, because I realized, and I think I've always known this, but it just took a while to have a good analogy for it, is whenever we feel that way and we're just like, I just want to completely quit, a lot of what I realize, especially if you have your goal in mind of what you want. So for me, I've always wanted to be in academia, and I always wanted to be that respected professor. I've always wanted to be a college professor and, have a legacy and have a following. So when I'm gone, I don't disappear. I think that's what's driving me through everything. So that kind of goal is always whenever I'm just sitting there in a practice room and, I think okay, in my future, if I have students like this, what am I going to tell them when I'm doing this? How I felt. And in a way, saying that you went through it too is the first step. Acknowledging that, we're not godlike figures as professors. We go through it even now, actually. And the other one is that whenever you're thinking about where you're going next, often your life is going to take you, like you said, on a detour. And even then, a full-blown detour may be almost too extreme. Like it may actually be because I always imagine my life as we're on that big highway towards, for me, a professor position. And that highway can get really crowded sometimes. I mean, crowded, and you hit your roadblock and you're stuck. And then you're like, you wait till the next exit, you take the exit, you go on that frontage road, and I can still I still see the highway. I'm not doing a whole big detour and losing sight of the highway. I still see that highway. But when I see, okay, the traffic's loosened up a little bit, I get back on the highway and I go again for a little bit longer. So it's never like you fully leave sight of what you want. It's more like you just accept that you're going to have just a slight little change, then you get back on. So when it comes to full-blown changing of careers, I've never done that. I've always been focused on, as a university professor. It doesn't mean it won't happen. Because life happens. I don't know if you might have heard about me. I have a fiance who's in the military. So, we might have to move every 3 to 4 years. And so what are we going to do? I can't stay at the same school and do FaceTime all the time. What path? And I'm just going to have to take that next little, that little segue, that little detour onto the frontage road and wait to see what I can figure out.
Yeah.
So it's never ever just done. It's never just a complete change, at least for me. Others I know, but not for me.
Yeah. What are some of those little side roads that you've taken in your career?
Sure. Yeah. So the one that was the most recent came out whenever I was in my doctorate. So I got ABD. So you're all but dissertation. You don't have to be on campus anymore, which is actually kind of nice. So you can go live wherever you want, but you're still working on your dissertation. So magically, when that happened, I got a call from a harpist who lives in Hong Kong, and she owns a harp company, a harp retail company. And Ms. Richter recommended me, and boom, I think it was in 6 months, I was living in Hong Kong. Wow. And what I was doing there is I was teaching younger students. They were doing the ABRSM curriculum. So I had to figure out that curriculum, which is very different than doing Suzuki or something like that. And I had to play harp, in the full gown with the gold harp up at the top of the Shangri-La Hotel, which absolutely, I hated it so much. Playing that, playing Happy Birthday every night. And then I, of course, had to give recitals and help organize things, which was at the time good. That was the fun part, but everything I had to do was work with, young 4-year-olds who were, while I was trying to work with their hands, they're like punching their mom on the side and screaming. And oh my gosh, it was just one of those things where I was like, okay, I took this detour thinking that, it's Hong Kong, this is so exciting, but I feel so empty here. And for, after a while, I found my peace with it, but then I actually got sick. So when I say got sick, I went home for Christmas, came back, and it was bad. I dropped about 20 pounds, fainting all the time. To this day, I don't know what it was. And it was kind of like the nail in the coffin type thing. So I headed back home after I was better and finished up my dissertation, back home with the parents, which, after you've been living in Hong Kong, you're getting a doctorate, you've been on your own. No offense to all parents out there, but there's a certain level of just you feel defeated. Like, how did this happen? I'm back at home, sitting here where I grew up with high school and working on this paper. So that's an example of where I was sitting there. I got back on that highway and I was stuck. I was stuck again.
Do you think
But
that was helping to motivate you finish your dissertation?
no, actually, that was a very hard time in my life.
Okay.
I think back to the hardest time in my life was actually whenever I was right after I got sick and was trying to finish that
Mm.
dissertation. And that's actually where, the magical people in your life really do help you. And
Mhm.
so Chris entered the picture. And right around that time, I got the call to come out to Virginia.
Mm.
So James Madison University contacted me, Washington and Lee, and then the Virginia Harp Center, which is a major retail company on the East Coast, because I had experience
Mhm.
being in Hong Kong with retail. So it actually, as much as I was just so frustrated, it was the stepping stone to something else.
Yeah.
So even when you're feeling like this is the end, oh my gosh, there's always something still churning. And that's what I figured out pretty quickly.
What brought you to your job at JMU?
What brought me there was a combination of things, because if it was only, for example, a JMU only, because it's an adjunct position,
Mhm.
and that is a whole different podcast to talk about adjunct. But I will tell you this, that unfortunately will not support enough for a full-blown move.
Mhm.
What brought me was the fact that working at the Virginia Harp Center, which is kind of like a harp hub, and
Mhm.
I realized very quickly the harp world is very small.
Mhm.
In that hub, as a retailer, I was going to be basically the staff harpist, the one who would not only help pick out the instruments, that come from the big line in Healy and from Camac in France. I was also the one who was going to help people find their instruments and help sell them. And
Mhm.
I was able to see, all the repertoire and order it and go through it and be the one that someone says, hey, what's that yellow book that's intermediate and it has canon and D in it? And I can just go boom, boom, boom.
Mhm.
So my doctorate and all that stress, I
Mhm.
instantly could be the resource for that. And it was so rewarding. It
Mhm.
really was, to be able to be that resource and feel like I was of use. And to this day, because of that, all the students that I have, I know exactly how to help them with their instrument, what
Mhm.
pieces to go for, where to get them from, where not to get them from, how to change strings, what are the strings made of. All that retail experience was hard.
Mhm.
Anybody will tell you, talking to people on the phone in retail, just telling you, if you ever call people up in retail, just be super kind and just
Yeah.
love them, because
Mhm.
they go through hell. I'll tell you that right
Mhm.
now.
Yeah.
But it was a true joy. And I met wonderful harpists, because professionals,
Mhm.
major players, Chicago Symphony harpists. All these people will come down and I get to meet them, talk to them, go to the conferences. It was magical and it paved the way.
Mhm.
So it was one of those things I realized quickly, that the adjunct position, yes, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to be a professor, but adjunct would not fully support me. It was the combination of them two and what they represented and what they could do in the future is
Mhm.
what made me jump. And I left Chris actually for that. So we had to have a long distance relationship for, gosh, I think it was like a year and a half, 2 years. But we're good. We're still together, so which is good. But that was a tough decision for sure.
Mhm. How would you define the moments in your life that were either detours or like off the path that you would have ideally had, maybe?
I think I would define it kind of like what I told you about the highway
Mhm.
scenario. It's never anything where I'm completely going off the road into the field.
Mhm.
It's always been where I've been like, all right, let's just get off on this part here and let's just keep an eye out, be patient, then get back on. It's always been something that I know, especially after realizing how everything has this kind of domino effect.
Mhm.
Everything who you are and who you become are all a culmination of the experiences you have.
Mhm.
So, that 4-year-old kicking his mom in those harp lessons, down to, parents screaming at me on the phone because, oh my gosh, my harp string is broken and how do I fix this? As silly as it sounds, that stuff paves the way to help you how to have more tolerance, more understanding, and overall, you're just more compassionate and willing to go through harder times later, because
Mhm.
it's never easy.
Mhm.
I will say, so there was one that I found, one too that I was excited to share with you too, but the ones that I think, especially that go in line with kind of how I'm talking about things, there were two on here. The one that I liked was the Haydn one, where he says, "There was no one near to confuse me, so I was forced to become original." And I love that because in a way, I sometimes almost feels like I've always been on that detour. I mean, I didn't have the background. I didn't go to a conservatory. I didn't have ensemble practice for a decade before I came to school. I've always been kind of going my own route. And because of that perspective, he's right. You're forced to become original because I can't rely on just, oh, your teacher was this, or you went to this school. You have to, one, make sure you know your stuff, of course, right? You can't just skirt through stuff. You can't, just take the side road, what is it? The side of the highway that people will run on and cut over. We won't take that part. We only take our front roads, but you really have to kind of find your own path. For me, and I really like that because it's true, and I'm going to continue to do that. I would say the best example of how I perceive that is, when you think of your career, there's going to be a lot of people who are, if it's a 2-story house, and they're going into a single door that's a single flight of stairs, I'm going to learn how to build a ladder. Right? I'm going to learn how to put that ladder up to the 2nd-story window, and I'm going to go that way instead. And I have to live like that all the time. And it works, actually. It really works. Times are changing. You can't just stick with the same stuff. So if the path you're thinking about is not it, you'd be surprised how other things happen in different ways, even though it's not what you originally imagined, actually.
Yeah.
And let's see here. Oh, the one I did want to share with you, actually, from a book that pretty much if you ever, hopefully in grad school, read this. Have you heard of the Soprano?
I have heard of it, yeah.
Oh my gosh, this book, this is like one of the things. You have Miss Richter, my teacher, and this book changed my life.
Yeah.
And the reason for it says right side up reflections on life and other performances. So it's that unconventional approach for an unconventional person that helps reinforce it. And this book itself, the one quote that I absolutely love, it says, especially when it comes to teaching and your path throughout this life and teaching itself, she says that nobody ever teaches anyone else how to teach. So let's not pretend. You learn how to teach by opening up, by questioning, by doubting, by exploring, by rebelling. You learn how to teach by just learning how to learn. And all those little sidetracks that we take, all that little things, that's how you learn. That's how you learn how to learn. It's not someone telling you what it is. You just got to be willing to go for it.
Definitely.
It's been great chatting with you. And I love thinking about this too and putting it down because my perspective changes all the time. Every student almost changes perspectives with me because everyone has their own path. So, hey, honestly, as long as people are willing to be open and learn, and in the end, I feel like, you talk about success and failure, but failure really is just learning, and learning is success. So if you take that approach, things don't seem so bad if they don't go the way you want.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoyed speaking with Dr. Wappel, and one thing in particular that she mentioned I found really motivating and inspiring. She said failure is learning, and learning is success. That seems really simple, but I think a lot of students especially do not see failure as success, the A plus B equals C sort of situation. If you're interested in other episodes of the Detours in Music podcast, you can find it on my website, laurarupelobo.weebly.com, or on the Detours in Music podcast YouTube channel. You can also hear the podcast on Spotify and Apple Music podcast apps, although we are a little bit backtracked on those as I can only input 2 hours worth of episodes on the 1st of every month. Another great way to stay connected to the podcast is with the Detours in Music podcast Instagram. Thank you for listening, and I hope you tune in to the next episode.